All right, shared memory. SMP, you may see this every once in a while. SMP, a lot of times with kernel, is it an SMP enabled kernel, Linux kernel? But shared memory multiprocessor. So if you have multiple processors, they need to, well, they're sharing a piece of memory in general, not always, but in general. At least with the processors we're running here. Doesn't have to always be the case, by the way, but in here we are. Hardware provides single address space for all processors. Notice in this picture you have memory and I/O. They're connected via some type of network, a bus, to different caches of all the different processors. So what's the access time for these processors? Well, it depends. If it's in your cache, you know it's that. Otherwise, it's how long it takes to go to your cache through whatever the network is to main memory and then back through the network. All right, so looking at this picture, can one processor affect the memory access time of another?
What was the picture?
Can one processor, if this processor is trying to access memory, can this processor affect how long that takes?
Sure.
Yeah,
Why?
because they're both trying to access the same thing. Don't they have to wait for each other?
Yeah, they have to wait for each other. So there might be different accesses going to main memory. Another one that might be hard to see, yeah, if they're both trying to get a piece of memory, if that processor over here goes first, then yeah, he has to wait longer. Another thing that might be hard to see is what if this processor is getting something from him while this guy's trying to get something from memory? Would that affect it?
Yes.
It
Depends.
depends. If this is a switch network here, where everything is an individual channel, then it's not going to affect it because he could communicate with the two caches at the same time this guy's communicating with memory. If this is a bus where only one person can talk at the same time, then he has to complete his cache to cache access before the other guy can do cache to memory access. Fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's do a simple breakdown example. Let's sum 100,000 numbers on 100 processors in unified memory architecture. I forgot to tell you the difference here.
Oops.
Uniform versus NUMA.
Numa.
NUMA. Uniform, all processors have the same memory system and they're all connected to the same last memory. You could have different processors with different caches levels inside of different sizes and different attributes. That would be NUMA because they're not all the same. But let's just do uniform because that's the easiest way to think about it. NUMA gets annoying. So you have 100,000 numbers and 100 processors. So you need to partition 100 numbers per processor. Why is that?
What?
You're going to sum 100,000 numbers.
Oh,
You know?
because it's split 100 ways.
Yeah, so 100,000 divided by 100,000. Great.
Yeah.
So initial sum on each processor starts at 0. Then for I, whatever your processor number up to what plus 1, add the numbers back to the sum. So now that each of these 100 each processor executes this code, which means for their 1,000 numbers, they're going to come up with a final sum. Correct?
Yeah.
So you have 100 sums. What do you need to do next?
Add them together.
Add them together. What's the most efficient way to do that?
Divide and conquer.
Okay. In what way?
Do them in little chunks, and then add those chunks together.
Let me write this out.
Yeah.
So if you got a vector here. Actually, yeah, we'll do vector. So sum 0, sum 1, sum 2, sum 3, sum 4, sum 5, sum 6, ... This n might be 1,000. What's the most efficient? How should you sum this up?
0 plus 1 plus 2 plus
Well, remember, these are all, we'll do it down here. Processor 0, processor 1, processor 2, processor 3, processor 4, processor 5, processor 6, ... to, of course, processor N.
Yeah.
Actually, to make this example really easy, let's do 7. So we had at least 8 processors right here. Good. What's the best way to do this? Well, who's doing the summing? Everyone summed their own individual numbers, right?
Yeah.
So what you're saying is, what are you saying?
Well, I mean, I was thinking just do it like one by one, but you wouldn't have to.
So who's doing the summing? Or what's being summed? Or what do you mean by one by one?
Well, like I was saying, you could do like S0 plus S1 plus S2.
Well, who's doing that summing? Processor 0, processor 4, processor N.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Which summing? Are we talking about the overall?
Right. So the eventual goal is to get this whole sum into one number, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we want the final sum, right? We'll just call sum. I don't know why I want to do an 8 every time we write an S. Sum final, which should be the sum of all those, right?
Mm-hmm.
The sum of the sums we just did. Just to make sure everyone's tracking. Remember, we had 100,000 numbers on 100 processors. Each processor did a sum of their chunk of numbers, and they have stored it inside the sum array. And what I'm saying is this sum array up here are the different sums that each processor has done. So sum 0, processor 0, sum 1, processor 1, so forth and so on. So in order to get our final sum, we need to sum up all these numbers into a final sum.
Yeah.
I'm asking, how should we go about doing that? What's the simplest way to do that?
Do it in the line.
So have processor 0 do what?
All of it.
Just have processor 0 sum them all. How many summations would processor 0 have to do?
And
In sum. Okay. So we had P0 sum them up, you'd have in. Can we do it faster?
Yes.
Yes.
How can we do it faster?
Jumps.
Why not like, all right, so you have like n processors, so let's see, you could have them each do it like, let's see, you could have one processor do like add the result of the sum they just did and then the one before it, and then you have like, and then you divide it in half basically.
So this could become the sum of 0 plus 1, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then this
then
would
you
be the
have-
sum of 2 plus 3.
Yeah.
This would be the sum of, wait, this right here, D7. Yeah, you got it.
And then you just, and
4
then you
plus
could,
5. And this could be the sum of, was it 6 and 7?
yeah.
And then you want to do it again?
Yep.
Yeah.
Just
Sum
keep doing
0
that.
plus-
till
there you
know.
go.
Yeah. And then one more time.
And then one more time. Alright, so then how many sums do you have?
That's just like 7.
Or actually, I should say, how many
Well,
time units?
Log it in.
Yeah,
Oh.
log, as opposed to
Oh.
n of them, right?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Sure.
Because you did half the sums here, half all the way down.
Mm.
So if you have 100, that would take you 8 ticks, as opposed 8 clock cycles, so to speak, or 8 sum, however long it takes to do a sum, as opposed to 100.
That's pretty
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Did y'all do that in networking, or
Do what?
did y'all do this in
Don't
networking?
ask me for anything.
All right. By the way, guys, this has a very important name.
Long.
No, this is called gather, because you are gathering it all together.
You don't come up with the most creative names.
So if this is called gather, what if one guy had a name and he wanted to move it to everything else? That's called scatter. So the opposite of gather is to scatter. All right?
Sure.
Wow.
So
So keep in mind, gather and scatter can be log-based in operations. You okay, PJ? You're making it. Would you like to come up with a new name for it?
No, they're all right.
They're all right. It's
Gather and scatter.
I think we can.
Not
It's a
scanner,
little class.
scatter.
It's a little clean. I've only got name one.
Okay, so here's another picture of it. All right, this is
Whoa.
kind of a
Whoa.
weird way to do it.
Whoa.
Wow.
I don't
Okay, look at the bottom. That makes more sense. Because, okay, they added 0 and 4 together. 1,
Oh,
1 and 5. Yeah.
2 and
I like
6,
my way
and
better.
7. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they did it again until they were done. Okay, great.
That's true.
So going up is called gather. Going back down is called scatter.
Yeah.
All right, everyone ready for GPUs?
No.
Yeah.
Tell me when you're ready. Okay, now Joan's ready. Okay.
I just needed a second.
SGI. Stargate.
Okay, start. Wow. Silicon graphics.
Fine. I liked mine more, but okay.
All right. So video cards, you just had a piece of memory and you wrote to the memory, and then the hardware would just shoot that to your screen. The piece of memory was called your frame buffer.
Yeah.
Yeah. You still have a frame buffer. We just decided to do a couple of extra things, just to help out.
Just help out.
History. Originally, very high-end computers would do 3D graphics, hence SGI. I'm sorry, silicon graphics. What?
Nothing.
Moore's law tells you that as time goes by, the cost of a transistor is going to decrease, and you're going to be able to fit more transistors inside of a significant single area, so it's higher density.
Yeah.
The thing about 3D graphics, as what we call, is they are doing 3D graphics, because remember with your pixels, is something called embarrassingly parallel. That's the term. Because there is basically no syncing between each frame. You can calculate a pixel by the previous frame, and you don't need to do any type of lock or synchronization. What I'm saying here is, remember this example over here, once everyone did their sum, we had to synchronize and then gather the sums together, correct?
Yeah.
Over here, if you want to calculate what the next pixel is going to be, you don't need to communicate with all your other pixels. You don't care. You just need to know what the previous state was, and then you can calculate it. So there's basically no synchronization in graph or 3D processing, which means that you can get near theoretical performance by adding more and more cores to your graphics card.
So basically, a single pixel just relies on itself.
A single pixel only needs the previous information. It doesn't need to
For
know.
that pixel.
Yeah, for that pixel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't care about the rest of you. I'm
Exactly.
focusing on me.
You got it. You got it. So you could literally have an entire core dedicated to every pixel if you wanted to.
Yeah. That'd be a really big computer.
You would think that.
Well, until we get better cores.
Well, hang on to your seat.
Oh.
I'm kidding.
Not
All
there
right.
yet.
So GPUs, yeah. Thank you, Jonah. Thank you. So yeah, it's oriented towards 3D graphics tasks, which are embarrassing parallel. You can still do a lot of vertex pixel processing, shading, texture mapping, rasterization. Y'all are probably familiar with this since y'all play games, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. All right, graphics in the system. Hey, these can be kind of confusing. Wow.
I like that purple.
Okay. These two things don't really exist anymore.
Yeah.
Just this one.
Okay.
We're going to focus on lower right. The other two were a little more, yeah, that's old school.
VGA. Yeah, we don't.
That's not very, I guess, the way it's done anymore. So the AMD example, you have your CPU, your core. They have something called the North Bridge, which is integrated now in the processor. It's just how do you bridge with memory. How do you communicate with memory? And you also can talk to chipsets, aka your GPU. Notice that your GPU is not part of the CPU in this example. I know there's some called APUs that have them, but we're not going to talk about that right now. But it has to communicate, the core communicates with a communication controller off to a chipset that's off on the motherboard, which then goes to the GPU and then goes back. So, is there a lot of overhead going from the CPU to the CPU? Or to the GPU, sorry, CPU to the GPU. Or is there definitely overhead, I guess. First off, is there overhead? Yes, but it's actually a good amount because the internal bus right here is pretty fast, but going off chip is slow. You gotta go to the GPU and then you gotta go back off chip, back to the processor. So there's definitely some overhead cost to this type of architecture.
How can we improve it?
How can we improve it? Well, notice something about your processor. Wow, this is really old school over here. Your GPU actually has a piece of memory in it.
Yeah.
So if you leave the memory on the GPU and you just tell it what instructions to execute, then you don't have you're not consuming much bandwidth right here is the point. You're just loading it up, GPU up and telling it to have at it.
Get that guy back.
So processing is high data parallel, GPUs are highly multi-threaded, a lot of thread switching, plenty of memory. This is a heterogeneous system. What that means is the architecture of your CPU is not going to be the same as your GPU. CPU is very good for sequential code, GPU is good for parallel code. GPU actually, I can't execute a lot of serial code. It can't run an operating system because it doesn't have exceptions, although there might be some new GPUs that have implemented them. Programming languages, your GPU can do DirectX, OpenGL. Hopefully that makes sense. You're familiar with that. There's something called C for graphics. Hey, you could talk about that if you want to, or HLSL, or CUDA. But I'm going to do OpenCL, so CUDA might not be it. CUDA.
I like these names.
You like those names, but you don't like scatter and gather?
No.
Wow, you're so picky. All right, so let's see what an older process GPU looks like.
I like the purple choice.
All right.
Maybe not with black font.
All right, so what are we looking at? Okay, this is a GPU Tesla, which is probably, how old is that? It's at least 40 years old.
40 or
Four.
Oh,
40.
Same as someone.
4 years old. All right.
Video. I love like an art degree. It's like, yeah, 4 years. Oh, that's ancient. Like other degrees, they're like, oh yeah, we do stuff from 100 years ago.
Oh yeah, 4 year man. It's a paperweight now.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, the floppy disk.
All right, there's different ways to investigate this. Do top down or bottom up. I'm going to start bottom up and then I'm going to go back down.
Okay.
So you're going to learn it. I'm going to explain it to you twice.
Okay. Hopefully.
Over here, you have something called a SP, a streaming processor. This thing only can do very basic things like, bless you. Like those MMX, you add 2 pixels, multiply 2 pixels, bless you again. But you've now hit your quota, just so you know.
No more sneezing.
You know, it can only do add, multiply, very basic operations. The GPU, or this architecture, put 8 of them together, along with some floating point units just in case. And inside of this unit, you have a cache, a multi-thread issue, so you can issue all these different streaming processors and iCache. What does this look like to you?
Oh wow.
What's the difference between iCache and Ccache?
There's no Dcache, so that would be its regular. I don't know why it's not called Dcache, but it's data cache for data. You know,
Component
pixels,
cache?
component cache, sure. What does this look like? If these were ALUs, would that help any?
Processor.
Yeah, it looks like a processor.
Oh, it's a mini processor.
It's a mini processor, but it has little streaming processors inside of it.
Ooh.
We talked about SMT, where you could issue up to 4 instructions. Notice here it can issue up to 8 instructions inside of its one processor. Then you have different processors. Each of those processors, which have 8 mini processors, you
Part
can,
of a bigger processor.
part of a big, yeah. You know where this is going.
Processor set.
I already forgot what TPC. I think that's thread. I forgot. Thread, whatever. And then you have multiple of them all connected together.
And a big processor.
And a bigger processor, which is where you actually do your distribution of work, compute distribution, pixel work, et cetera, et cetera. And this whole thing is your GPU, which then connects to the bridge that can then talk to your CPU.
Oh, the CPU's so tiny now.
So again, in reverse, the CPU wants you to do some work. I don't know, change the color of a pixel, sends it from the CPU to the bridge to the host. It figures out, okay, where are we going? We're doing pixel work. Figures out which one of these giant thread lanes it wants to go to. Maybe this guy. He decides to send it to this subprocessor, which then finally sends it to that processing unit, which then spits it back out over to, let's see, display interface, which is probably right into the RAM, and then it finally spits it out.
And then Mario moves.
And then,
1 pixel.
One pixel.
well, yeah, but in 3D parallel, you know, this guy might be taking care of Mario. One Goomba should be maybe 4 of these guys, another Goomba. You know, you see what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
All these guys, yeah.
I just want to make pixel art now.
Goomba. You don't remember the Goombas?
I never played
No,
Mario.
no, no.
You-
I don't. Whoa.
I'm sorry.
I'm disappointed.
I mean, I played on the Wii.
What'd you do in your
That's-
childhood then?
Did you read?
I was a big reader, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. That
Hey,
makes
I
sense.
read too.
I liked
what I
I liked
missed
the
it.
third Mario the best. I didn't,
Oh,
I
for
missed
NES?
like
I didn't really care for the
N64.
second one. And the first one was okay, but
The
Missed
second one-
N64 Mario.
The Sega one was a lot of fun. I liked it, but the third one is the best for the NES. That's hands down. There's no competition on that one.
the first
Oh, did
Souls
you
and
get
everything.
your
I like Mario Kart.
N64 stuff you ordered?
I did, and then I fell asleep.
Did you buy one?
What?
And then 64?
Well,
He
yeah,
has
when
one.
I was a kid.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was about to say, I still
Then he
have
got.
mine.
What did you get? You ended up getting Pokemon
Pokemon
Snap.
and the Stadium.
Yeah, Stadium. We need,
First
bring it
system
in.
like I got involved with.
Bring it in. We'll
PS2.
play it on your computer.
Really? No,
your
mine was
little
the,
TV.
Mine was a Nintendo 64.
I was saying the first
one.
system I ever like got involved with was a PS2. So.
Oh, okay.
Oh, my first
Well,
system
I
was a
mean,
64.
I'm older, so that makes sense.
My first system was a
In that
64.
club, you played in that
Ours
Or
was
Sega.
PlayStation.
Sega might- No, I think 64 is before my Sega.
Sega.
We used to have
I
two,
used-
like, the
I used to
little
play that on
ones.
the GameCube.
Okay, anyway, moving on.
So your streaming processor, by the way, you thought the streaming processor was just one unit? Well, I just
JK.
lied. JK.
Each one has multi.
Each one of them, a single FP and floating units. Each SP is fine-grained. A warp is a group of these 32 frames, 32 threads.
So each Nitto box has more stuff of it inside of it.
You got it.
Yeah. That's why it's all colored. It's
All right. So in other words, here's the takeaway. How many processing units are in this thing?
infinite.
A ton.
A ton. And they keep adding more and more. All right, we're good. Classifying GPUs, they don't fit nicely in our SIMD MD model. That's kind of a lie, but whatever. They have conditional execution, and a thread allows the illusion of MD. But you generally, if you write a piece of code to run on your GPU that has branches, it's going to slow down significantly. I prefer to keep it as a SIMD situation in general, with a couple of MIMD capabilities built in just here and there. So that's the best way I think of putting it. Wow, we're just going to keep talking about this.
Yeah.
No, we're skipping this.
Okay.
You're going to learn about this
Here
again,
goes.
trust me.
Huh?
All right, here we go. Multi-core with SIMD. Let's see what we got. SIMD processors, 4 to 8, 8 to 16. Yeah, this is more like 64 to 128, whatever. Lanes per processor, 2 to 4,
It's really
way
big.
more. Notice that the GPU, GPU has a smaller cache, way more processing power, way more
Oh,
no, it does have more memory. That's right, less memory.
because it's smaller.
Memory protection, great, but nothing else that's not cache coherent. Basically, the best way to think about it is your GPU is a giant, wide number crunching machine.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's good at crunching numbers. It's not very good at making sure that it didn't mess up and crunch someone's number that it shouldn't have crunched. That's your job. But that's basically what it does.
Yeah.
We're not going to look at that.
Oh, please no.
Okay, message passing. All right, we're almost done.